Okay, so we briefly talked about this yesterday. Okay, the activity we're going to be doing today, you are going to design a controlled experiment that will test the effect of a variable or a factor of your choice. Could be one of the ones we talked about yesterday, could be something else, okay, if you thought of something else, okay, that will affect the growth of a plant. Right? So in this activity, again, you'll be completely designing the lab experiment, okay, but you won't go past procedure. Right? If we're actually not running the lab, there's no way we can have any observations, analysis, conclusion, or evaluation. Okay? So this variable could be nutritive, like the amount of water or sunlight or what you put in the water, or something to do with the kind of light or color or whatever. Okay? It can be anything you come up with, okay, that could in any way affect the growth of a plant. All right? Could be conditional orientation of the plant. I once had a person who designed the lab where they had I think they had 8 different plants, and they were all set 45 degrees apart from each other, and they wanted to see if the angle of the plant from vertical was going to affect its growth. Okay, so I mean, there's all kinds of things you can try. We're not actually running the experiment, so okay, as long as it's a good controlled experiment and there's the possibility it could have an effect on the growth of a plant, I'm good with that. Okay. Now, the first thing that should appear in your experiment is an abstract. Okay, we didn't talk about this yesterday, it just totally slipped my mind. Okay, whenever you're doing, let's say, real science, okay, so if you're like a graduate student at university or something like that, you got to have money to do it. Okay, it's not just free. So what you usually have to do is, I hate to use the word sell your soul, but you sort of do. Okay, you have to sell your experiment. That's how you get it paid for, right? And you have to, have a proposal that sort of says to somebody who could give you a grant, here's what I'm going to do my experiment on, and here's how the results of it might be useful commercially. Right? Because in the end, unfortunately, it's all about money. All right? Lots of scientific discoveries are accidental. Okay? But the person who gave the money for that grant kind of owns the rights to whatever you discover. All right? So, like DuPont owns the rights for Teflon. Okay? Because they gave the grant to the guy who accidentally created Teflon, right? Which is the non-stick stuff that's on pans. Okay, so those kind of things. You're doing an experiment. You kind of have to have a sales pitch essentially for your experiment, and that's what an abstract is. An abstract is a few sentences where you say, here's what I know about the growth of plants. Here's what I'm going to study about the growth of plants, and here are some practical applications of it. Okay, so it's really like 3 to 5 sentences, short paragraph, okay, that says what you know about plant growth, what you're going to do, and what are the practical or useful or commercial applications of that. Okay, everybody kind of with me there? So you'll have a short paragraph to start it off that just talks about that. Okay, then you'll have your problem. Okay, what is the effect of whatever variable you pick on the growth of a plant? And then you will have your design. Okay, that will be the manipulated, responding, and controlled variables. How many manipulated variables can you have? 1. Okay, you can only test one thing, or you'll never know which of the things you're testing actually cause the plants to change their growth. All right, so you have to make sure you identify only one, but more importantly, when you actually write out the procedure, that you are actually only testing one thing and that you don't forget something else. Everyone follow me on that? Okay. Then you'll have your responding variable, which for everybody is going to be the growth of the plant. And remember that we want to say in that responding variable how we're measuring that. Okay? There could be qualitative stuff like I'm just observing it and whatever, okay? But there should also be some quantitative stuff like actual measurements, height, mass, number of leaves, something, okay? You guys decide what's appropriate for the plant that you're going to use. And that's another thing you're going to have to come up with in your materials is what kind of plant are you going to use in this experiment? Okay, do you need something that grows really quickly? Do you need something that grows really slowly? Big, small? Okay, those are all things you have to consider when you're designing. Okay, and then for your controlled variables, that's going to be a longer list. Okay, normally we say you need to have 3, but I would say in this experiment you need to identify essentially everything that could affect the growth of a plant that you're not actually changing yourself. Okay, now realistically that's probably not going to be more than about 4 or 5 things. Okay, but you still need to mention, if you're, let's say, doing something to do with light, that you're keeping all the other things that could affect the growth of a plant, like water and things like that, all the same for all of the plants. Okay, so you identify those controlled variables, and then when you're doing your procedure, make sure you're referring back to them and going, okay, for that controlled variable, I'm going to write in my procedure how I would make sure I keep that the same for all of my experimental groups. Okay, everyone follow me there? Okay, so make sure you look back to those when you're doing your procedure so that you are sure you have controlled them, because that's what I'm going to do when I'm looking it over. All right, then you'll have your hypothesis. Okay, so if this affects the growth of plants and I do this, then this is what I'm going to see. Okay, same format as always. Then your list of materials. So in your list of materials, you probably have to decide how many plants you're going to need to effectively do this experiment. All right, whenever you have a good controlled experiment, you need to have one plant, in this case a plant, that is what we call your control group. For that plant, essentially it needs to grow in the natural conditions of the plant. It acts as a comparison for you. That way you can compare all the other plants that you have that you manipulated something for to that original plant, so you know whether they did better or worse than the natural conditions of the plant. Everyone follow me there? Okay, so everyone should have one plant that grows in essentially natural conditions, where it gets 12 hours of sun, 12 hours of darkness. Okay, that it grows in essentially whatever temperature it would naturally grow in, right? Gets, a certain amount of water, all that kind of stuff. Okay, everyone follow me there? Okay, or if you're testing the amount of water, okay, your control group might get none. That way you could see what happens to a plant dies, okay, when you don't give it any water. Just things like that. Okay, you got to have a control group that acts as your comparison. All right. So make sure your procedure is detailed then. Okay, after your list of materials, make sure your procedure is detailed. How do I set this up? How often do I measure? How often do I water? How often do I feed? What kind of measurements do I take? Okay, how long is this experiment going to run for? All of that kind of stuff. All right, everybody with me there? Okay, so it's fairly straightforward. You guys know how an experiment works. This time you're just coming up with the procedure. Okay? All right. So we'll get started on that. You guys will have an hour and 5 minutes to get that done. Yes. Okay, it should already be in Google Classroom for you. I put it in there just a few minutes ago. We'll just double check. Yeah, it's in there. Okay, so it should be the first thing, same as always, plant growth lab design. Okay, so there's a couple of files there. There's you click on this, okay, the big heading, and that'll take you to your Google Doc that you're going to fill in, right? And then this is just the sheet that I didn't photocopy for you because we want to save money, so we're not photocopying. Jim Prentice, this is your fault. Okay, he's not going to listen, but whatever. Okay. So yeah, okay, that's the lab sheet or the handout sheet if you need to see it. All right, and then this is the one you guys are actually going to fill in. All right.